Good morning and welcome to Morning Coffee with Brigid. I'm Brigid Burke and it is now the 28th of August and it's interesting. I have something that's supposed to increase the light on this, but good morning, Alex. Instead I feel like it's gotten darker in here all of a sudden. It's kind of weird. But there is blue sky overhead, so don't know. Very interesting. And good morning, Joanne. Yeah, so I'm here today. This is supposed to be probably one of the last real, good morning, Pat. Good morning. So this is going to be one of the real last hot, humid days here today. I mean, it's not bad out this morning. It actually is reasonably cool when you open the windows, but I end up shutting the windows for the live stream because otherwise, you're not going to be able to, you won't be able to hear me over the crows outside, over the cicadas, and over the traffic from the road that is, where I live is actually, it's funny, my mother had said something to me about living kind of in the low-lying area where I live. And, and I was like, I don't live in a low-lying area. I literally live on the edge of a cliff, actually. If you actually were to go to the highway and look up, my house is up on the edge of a cliff. And when I took the fencing out in the back of my yard, you go back a certain ways, and then there's a drop off to where the railroad was. It's not, it's not there anymore. The railroad hasn't been there in, I think when did they close the railroad there? It might have been in like the 60s or 70s. It's been a long time. So it's raining here again today. Yeah, hopefully we're gonna get, well, I don't know. That's probably typical early fall in New England though, I would think, right? It's, or pre-fall, is that I feel like there's like these misty, rainy mornings. I mean, we have that out here in the rural areas. I remember when I lived in South Hunterdon, it was like, that was that way in the morning. And people are like, oh yeah, you have the morning mist like every single day kind of thing. But we're not quite here. I mean, yeah, there's going to be storms tonight, and so it's going to be so that's going to cool things off again for a couple of days. So fortunately, this is just like a one-day thing. But then it's going to be a little bit humid over the weekend. But then for Labor Day on Monday, it's going to be, I think I saw a low of 59, which looks good. And that's the day my sister is having her Labor Day picnic, and also it's her birthday. So her birthday is actually on the 4th, but I'm going to be celebrating it then. And, as usual, per usual, I have a very... little more than usual here. Little more than usual there. Like only 2 feet at the beach yesterday, so it's been more than usual. Oh, okay. So you've had more rain up there. Bit more than usual. Okay. Okay. So, well, yeah. There's just, I feel like there are certain seasons. I know when I'm in England, I remember the first time I went to school in England, and I was at Reading in. And I mean, when I got there, it was like, no worries. When I got there, I was like, it was a sunny day when I actually arrived and when I got into my residence hall. And then it was like, it just pissed down rain for like the next week. And people were like, oh yeah, welcome to autumn in the UK. What was I mentioning last night? That the word fall doesn't seem to be used over in the UK. And, like, yeah, well, fall as in, the leaves falling, that's why we call it fall. Or also just the fall of, potentially the fall of the sun, I mean, it's that time when we are moving towards winter, when we have the fall of the nice summer weather into that. So, I am, like I said, fall is my favorite season. So to me, I'm not, I'm willing to tolerate the kind of in-between kind of stuff because I'm like, that's okay. We're going to be getting to those perfect days with, the turning leaves and all that kind of stuff. So, and of course somebody said to me, oh yeah, you can start doing the fall of humanity. Yeah, well, that's another topic. But interestingly though, since you mentioned that, Joanne, little trivial side note, the word Rahani from Rahani Healing, we always talk about it meaning as of one heart, but the actual breakdown of that word literally means being returned from the fall. Like being restored from the fall. Like literally that's what Rahani is supposed to mean on another level. Now, of course, I don't believe there ever was that kind of a fall, but, and I was told, no, there's not actually ever been. Well, I don't think there ever really was that kind of a fall. I think that's just a That's that's a mythology that sets the tone for disrespecting the earth, because nature is now corrupt. You idiots all corrupted nature, and you're all disobedient. So now your life is going to be hard. Well, yeah. Anyway, well, more synchronized messages. That's interesting. So today I have been so I've got on my agenda today. I've got to, like I said, I want to definitely get that Kickstarter together. Now, I would tell people that the Kickstarter is going to be live at the end of today, but I know from past experience that they need to approve your project before they will post it. And I'm already set. I already have an account with them, and I'm set up and everything, so that it should not take as long. I'm hoping that by Friday that the Kickstarter is up and I can start talking about the school, because I'm very excited about that. And excited about lecturing and pulling things together. I'm not going to be doing most of the lecturing. A lot of the work is going to be with my colleagues, and we've had several phone calls back and forth, and things are getting set up. So it's good. So that's all looking very, very good. And then that way I can have a presentation. I want to have a video that I can link people to, so that they can, just like I did with Rouhani. It's like, okay, that way I can link to you, can see all the different components of the project, and I talk about what we're trying to achieve, and then of course what the financials are, and why I'm, the amount of money I'm looking for, and why I'm looking for that amount, what it's for, because I've done the maths on some of this stuff. So yeah. So anyway, that's going to be a project today, and I have. Oh God! One of my patrons, who's also paying me to do an editorial project, she's emailing me with stuff all this week, and I haven't been able to respond to her. Because she'll be like, can you read this article, or can you look at this? And I'm like, right now, no. I have to wait. So today I'm hoping to catch up on all of her stuff, and I'm doing some work for Dr. Kinsberry as well. She's asked me to take a look at, although she's told me that's not urgent, I still want to get that finished for her before the end of the month. That's what I had promised her. So, because she's, there's just stuff going on, for all of us everywhere, and that's just how it is. That's just what we're dealing with right now. And those of us who are academics, it's like, the semester starts. I think my courses go live. They said they're going to flip them live on, today's the 28th actually. Did I say it was the 27th? Yeah, my courses I think go live tomorrow for students, even though classes don't start until the 4th. So yeah, the 3rd or the 4th. I can't remember this year. No, I know what it is. There's Labor Day. Darn, I have an article due this week. You reminded me. Yeah. I have, there's Labor Day. They usually have it where I teach. They call it Red Hawk Day. It's like, I don't know. It's basically probably just a day for students to come in and get oriented and stuff, or, just kind of an initial day where they might have some certain events, and then they actually start classes the next day. So they start it on Wednesday, is usually where it starts. So, and then I don't know, the 15-week semester is just kind of weird, with them. But anyway, I'm ramping up for all of this kind of work, and I'm really hoping that with the increase in income and so forth, that I'll be able to go back to England, sometime this fall, because I really would like to be back there at some point. I don't particularly care about going in the winter. Because had Panther Days at Plymouth State. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's yeah, exactly. They have those things, and it's usually based on the sports team or whatever. And somebody had asked me once about the athletic record of Montclair's team. I'm like, I have no freaking idea. I didn't pay attention to them when I was an undergraduate. I don't pay attention to them now. Obviously I, hope for the best for them, but I'm not, I don't follow any of it. I never did. But they do tend to. Was it Ambrose Bierce? Ambrose Bierce was a satirist who wrote in the late 1800s. He was kind of in the same, he's kind of in the same vein as Mark Twain. Bierce actually has an interesting backstory, because he actually literally vanished. Like, nobody knows what happened to him. So there's actually kind of a mystery around him. But he's written a lot of good stories. He's written some good, like Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge is one of his famous ones. But he used to write for the papers, and he used to write satire. And he has a whole work that I have downstairs called The Devil's Dictionary. And it's great because it's his own satirical definitions of things. Now, mind you, he was writing like just antebellum period, like just after the Civil War. in the U.S. So we're talking, late 1860s to 1870s. Like this was his time period that he wrote. And I remember he had a definition of academy and academe, and his definition was academy, where people what was it? Where students go to study philosophy or something like that. And then he says it was academe, and then he says where students learn to study philosophy or something like that. And then academe was where modern students go to study football. I mean, it was like even then there was this idea that universities were centered around sport for some reason. So good morning, Suda. And so it was just kind of funny that I was just thinking about that. I have to find the exact definition down there. I should memorize it, but I never quite get it exactly right. But so anyway, we're talking about academics and school starting again and things like that. And the school that I'm going to be starting up for October. I thought September would be a little soon. And, for me, I mean, education is kind of a year-round thing. I, as somebody who went to grad school 3 times, it's like, if I was thought about, do I want another degree? No, I don't. I don't need another degree. I don't need another one. I've already got, I've got 2 masters, PhD. I don't need anything. I'm fine. I'm like, I feel like I'm at a point now where I'm like, okay, I feel like I have a few credentials where I can teach stuff. I've been teaching since 2003. So, and that was graduate level at Rutgers, and then I started at graduate level, but that was in their library science program. And then I moved over to teaching at Montclair. I was hired to do religious studies first, and then I was hired to teach myth and the Trojan War and stuff like that over in what they used to be, well, I don't know, I guess they still call an element of the classics department, but now it was general humanities, and then it became just humanities, because they thought, what does general humanities mean? To me, it was like the university that I was a librarian at for, I was a department head until I retired from that. Their humanities department was language, literature, writing, and philosophy. I'm like, what a way to say we don't care about the humanities. Like, let's just slam it all into one department. And it was clearly not a priority for them. I guess to be fair to them, they were probably more of a business school in the sense of they had a good business program, or at least a reasonably can talk this morning, well respected one. They also had a very good hospitality program as well. So that those were 2 things I know that they were legitimately top notch, like they were invested in. But they also had clinical psychology. I almost did my psych degree there actually, but then when I was looking through the coursework and when I was learning about stuff, there was some preliminaries I had to take to go into the psych program, and I was just thinking, no, I'm not going to do this, because the whole way in which psychology is done in that kind of MSW, LCSW, clinical kind of setting. To me, it's inimical to the way the human mind works, to the way the human soul is. It's literally, again, it assumes everything is cognitive and everything is neurological, and it works from that basis. And it's gotten away from anything that's like psychoanalysis. In fact, most of them, I remember when I was in charge of the collections at FDU, that one of the psych professors who was, I don't blame you there. One of the professors that, he was a really nice guy actually, but he came into me and he said, oh, let's just take all the Freud and Jung out of the library and throw it in the garbage. And I looked at him and I was just like, I think I literally said, fuck you. I was like, if you think there's no value to that, then you need to reevaluate your profession. I think he was shocked that I kind of said that to him, and again, he's a nice guy. He didn't deserve to be like, but I was just like, I'm not getting rid of it. I'm like, no, you need to start assigning more of that. There's a lot in Freud that we don't ascribe to right now. I think Jung gets gets dismissed as too mystical these days, but I'm like, no, he's the only one who's recognizing the fact that consciousness works in this way, that it works in this symbolic way, that it works. He's the only one who, be clear, he's not the only one. He's the only one of those major early players that, because you still have things like you have Gestalt psychology as well. Jung is OG. Yeah, it's, he's very, Jung is very, to me, I don't want to say I agree with everything that Jung has ever done. There's certain aspects of things that he's done. I tend to agree a little bit more with James Hillman's version of what he calls analytical psychology. Like there's psychoanalysis, there's analytical psychology, there's all these different names, and you like Jung and Rogers. See, I'm not. You hate their views on paganism and mysticism. Do you mean? I don't think you mean Jung's views, right? You like Jung and you like Rogers. Rogers, I'm not that fond of. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not that. I still feel like, and I did learn Rogers when I was doing grief counseling and such like that. But I'm not. I don't know. It's not. There's something in his approach that I feel it's still too. I don't know. There's something still too cognitive about it in a way. I still feel like there's just something there that kind of gets missed in trying to understand the big picture there, without going too far afield into that. But yeah, I know Rogers is. I've had a lot of teachers who really like Carl Rogers. So it's yeah, but I don't know. I haven't been. It's not been something that I personally resonate with too much. So trying to do all of this, but I've often felt like I was the head of modern psychology did me wrong. I'll take the mysticism. Yeah, and you know what? There's a lot of people. When I went to the Jung Institute, I was thinking about becoming a Jungian therapist, but it is way beyond. I hate that. What's the point? That's why I mix it up. Yeah, right. Exactly. It's like it's not. When I went to the Jung Institute, I had gone there because I was like I said, I was thinking about becoming a therapist. The cost is is insane, and the number of hours you have to do is insane. To become a Jungian therapist, I had to have a background in, I had to have done child and adolescent psych, and I had to have done, what was the other one? There was another, I think it was, had to do with, that's when I had to do class on the pharmaceuticals, on the drugs and stuff like that. Like, they wanted me to have at least have a foundation in those things. But it was going to be, in addition to the coursework for the Jung Institute, it was 300 hours of therapy for me with a Jungian therapist. I would have had to log 300 hours going into therapy first. And then after those 300 hours of therapy, I had to do, I think it was 100 hours of supervised therapy with a supervisor of other people. And then I had to log another 300 hours plus take the state test to get certified. And it was just more than I could handle with everything else I was doing. Plus, I think I figured it was going to cost me about $60,000 out of pocket, which I just, again, our whole thing about not having a trust fund, I don't have that kind of money. So it was not going to happen. So I have to do 3,000 hours, and with my added specialty, I have to do that. Yeah, and again, I understand that they want people to do practice. And in Jungian therapy, because in Jungian therapy, they want you to do all the shadow work. They want you to do all that stuff. In other words, they don't want you to go into this having not experienced it yourself. You see a lot of that. I've seen a lot of, who was telling me, it was one of my former students, actually, who had told me, he says, when I go, who was like a combat vet who had PTSD and stuff, and he said, you walk into one of these things and you've got this 25-year-old who's going to sit down and do your therapy, and you're looking, you're like, what do you know about me? People, I understand the idea of wanting the hours, wanting the experience, and wanting that kind of supervised context. But it's really, and that becomes something of a barrier too, because then people look at you. The people who have had really, really difficult traumatic life experiences, they don't want somebody, fresh out of their PhD, who's a child, or not a child, I shouldn't say that. I guess given the age that we are, maybe somebody who's more our age, or somebody who they feel is going to be able to relate to their experience. If they feel that they should just have one license, the national should eliminate the need for the state ones. Yeah, exactly. Everybody has their own requirements, and then it becomes a very expensive proposition to become a therapist. Like I said, I could have done it for free at the university I was at. But to me, I've always felt that modern psych is not, it just doesn't, I was the head of American Academy of Religion. I was the chairperson regionally for Mid-Atlantic region. I was the chairperson for psychology and religion, because that is really what my specialty was as an undergraduate. It was my specialty as a grad student in psych and religion. And for me, psych of religion is it's Freud, it's Erikson, it's Jung. It's the people who are dealing in that analytical, the quote-unquote, they call it the quote-unquote mystical. They only call it that because when you're dealing in the collective unconscious, it's not the kind of thing where you can, tie it to some neurological function, where you can tie it to some aspect of brain activity, some aspect of cognition and cognitive therapy. There's this idea that no, religion, and the thing is, to me, religion is one of those subjects that doesn't lend itself to that. It doesn't lend itself to that kind of analysis. I mean, sure, you can do brain scans, you can do things to kind of get a sense of, okay, if you have somebody who's in a meditative state or has some kind of experience seeing what happens in the brain or something like that. I mean, sure, you can do studies like that. How much they really tell you, I don't know. Because it's still, again, there's this idea of like, oh, this is the result of religion, or here's the function of religion, or this is why people follow religion, and trying to find some kind of neurological or cognitive basis from it. This is why I'm not a fan of evolutionary psych either. I remember being at an AR conference where basically somebody cut up and talked about, why as psychologists you need to be wary of evolutionary psych in a religious study setting. So because there's, and not because this person was not like a creationist or anything like that. It has nothing to do with that. It just has to do with the idea of there's always assigned some kind of a function to it. And in systems that try to assign things to survival functions, then what you're getting outside of is the whole realm of consciousness itself and how it works. The fact that we have arts, the fact that we have humanities, and I have read books on there where people just say, yeah, well, that's like, to people who are studying consciousness, it's like, or scientists who are trying to look at things from a behavioral standpoint or looking at it from a strictly neurological standpoint, they're like, the consciousness is like annoying. They're like, we don't know what to do with this. It's like something we want to kick under the rug and pretend that it's some weird byproduct. I'm like, how is consciousness a weird byproduct of something? Like, literally, it is so vast. And because, we can't look at all that stuff without sounding mystical or sounding, what was the old world, teleological, right? Teleological meaning that it has to do with, that it smacks of religion or smacks of spiritism or something like that. We can't have any of that in science. And it's like, look, I understand why you can't have a scientific thing where you say, we're going to attribute this to spirits. I get that. But the idea that truth can only be defined in that other way is just, it's as ridiculous as as necessarily assuming that everything happens because of spirits. It's why is this an either or proposition? And that if you accept any of that, now you're not being scientific, now you're this, now you're that. I mean, it's like, and again, to say that someone's not, you might not be being scientific with some of that stuff, but that doesn't also mean that you are delusional or that you're crazy. I mean, that's the problem that I have with it. That anything that's outside of, the hard objective data of science, which, by the way, is interpreted and misinterpreted in unbelievable ways. There was a study done in the Journal of, I think it was the Journal of Social Psych. It was a long time ago. I have to find the link to it again. It was a long time ago that this study was done. But, now it's a long time ago. It feels like yesterday, but it was sometime in the mid-2000s, I think, that they had done this study. And they were basically looking at bias in scientific studies in different disciplines. And, like in the hard sciences, how much interpretive bias is there? How much is there that goes on? And how much also, and the thing is that what the study was highlighting was that that clinical psych studies had an 85% bias rate. Like, in other words, it had an 85% rate that these were not studies you could rely on because of either a bias of somebody who was doing the study in the way that it was couched and presented, or, more importantly, a lot of times these studies are done with the funding of pharmaceutical companies. and they're basically want you to find results. They want you to find things that are going to focus on something that's going to sell their drugs. And so even though technically that's high, yeah, and even though that's kind of how they and they do it with other things too. It's not just with psychology. I mean, think about the time you go to the doctor and you have a sniffle and they're like, here, let's give you this high-powered antibiotic because the rep came today and gave me like a huge things and is going to promise me a trip to Hawaii. So, I'm going to give this out to as many people as possible. I mean, they're unfortunately that happens. And that's why people get very, very, whether you should always be suspicious of big pharma, but that's why people are. And I know, like, I've stopped going to doctors a lot, and I'm not advocating that people do this, but personally, I don't, if my doctor tells me, oh, you should really be on this or that, and I'm just like, yeah, thanks, no. I take as few drugs as possible. Even when I have headaches, I don't take drugs. I don't trust a lot of what's in them because everything is everything that it's in these drugs, they look at everybody like they're a machine, basically. And you're not a machine. You're not a machine. And also the way that these things can affect our consciousness, the way that they can affect things. And they don't understand consciousness at all. And I've always said this. Because they always talk about, we always look at the brain and we look at the nervous system and say, oh, okay, consciousness comes from here. Brain's really active, so this is where consciousness comes from. And I'm like, no, prove to me that it comes from the brain. You can't prove that it comes from the brain. You literally can't. Consciousness to me is an aspect of a bigger system that we're involved in. Like again, the tired waves on the ocean metaphor. And our consciousness is probably networked. This is why things like okay, another plug for my intuitive development class. It's coming up again this Sunday. I'm doing 10 weeks, so just another plug for that. If anybody, I know I had a bunch of people join me for the first week. I don't know if those people may or may not repeat for the second week because it's kind of, you can come and go as you want, but just make a little plug there since we're talking about this. But to me, my firm belief is, with my experience, that the brain is actually a filter for consciousness. It's not your actual source of consciousness. In other words, all of the things that happen in the brain, if you think about dementia and how dementia works, when the brain starts to break down and you have people who start to see, Aunt so-and-so who's been dead for 20 years or, they or start living in another time period and we always just think, oh yeah, their brain's breaking down. I'm like, well, what does that mean that their brain's breaking down? Like, they're seeing stuff that we're not seeing. And we just assume because the people in the space, dimensional space that we're in, that we can't see it, that, oh, well, that person's just crazy, they're delusional. Well, how do we know that? We don't know that. Maybe they are seeing something. It sure as heck is real to them. Trying to explain to my father that there wasn't water pouring out of his wall of his hospital room. And but of course, my mother and I were not seeing it. And we're both just like, you don't, kind of like what I said about the guy in the library the other day. It was just, this is the perspective that person's coming from. And a lot of times we just assume that these people are crazy and have to be managed into this world, but it's like, no, there's filters there that may have broken down. This is why they tell you to be careful with doing psychotropic drugs and things like that do you really want to break down those filters? You think about some of the experiences people have on like LSD and stuff like that, and people have bad trips on that, or on mushrooms, or any of those things that are not managed in the right way. When you start taking those filters away, there's a reason those filters are in place. We always talk about, like, I want to expand my brain power. It's like you want to make use of all the senses that you have available to you. You don't necessarily want to take away all your brain filtering because you will not be able to comprehend this reality in the same way. And that's why I think it's there. It's like the Donald Hoffman model, where he would talk about the idea that he metaphorically likens it to an interface. You have an interface. The workings behind it would blow your mind out. We can't comprehend the workings behind it, and its connections to everything else, and its connections to the wider reality. So we have this filter that allows us to kind of, this is our ordering principle. This is literally when we have mythologies of order. This is our ordering principle. This is what makes us able to say, no, okay, this is the way things are, and this is how time goes, and this is how we measure things. We have day, and then we have night, and we have this. We have these ordering principles that allow us to get a compass point, like a lock on where we are, so that we can function. If you lose all of that, then just think about it. Think about like being completely in the dark, or not knowing where you are, not knowing what time it is, not knowing what direction you're going in. I mean, that's a scary freaking thing. I mean, you can be, you can feel like you're lost, you know? Yeah, very cutting edge stuff. Apparently helps with coping and with addiction or depression, but no one talks about downsides. Right. And that's it. And the downsides are often dismissed. You will have people who have side effects and they just go, oh, you know, that's a side effect, you know. And then when you add in certain other factors that are going on, other chemical factors in the body, like hormones, for example. Hormones play a huge role in everything, in your functioning. And then when you talk about feminine hormones in particular, that is something that is not very well understood at all. There's very few people who have expertise in that, and there's not enough research done in that area, because we go through certain life changes and people just, you know, and some of these things are just absolutely horrific. They can absolutely, my mother and I were talking about it. One of the 5 conversations, maybe not even 5, maybe 3 to 5 conversations in my life I've had with her that has been meaningful, was about that. Because when I stopped being able to drive, she says, maybe you're starting to go through the changes. And she says, you know, I know people who go through these things. She says, she thinks she didn't go through anything, and I'm pretty sure she's went through some things. But she goes through different things. She says, but I've known people who even like literally had to be institutionalized because they literally, the breakdowns that they had, like they couldn't, you know, it was just, they couldn't manage it. And nobody seemed to know. It was just like, oh, well, you're just suffering from hysteria. Oh, well, you're just going through the changes. You know, it's not, it's a big freaking deal. It changes your life. It changes your body in a way that's just really fundamental. And so you add that all into the mix. But I guess back to cognitive therapies, I don't like them because to me, it's all completely the idea that you can reprogram your brain and that's going to fix everything. Now, sure, I mean, if you feel like there's a thought, you know, there's people who say they've had some success with that, but it's not, but that also implies that everything can be controlled through your cognition. And I'm like, but there's so much, like the reality, your cognition is like this head of a pin. You're not, if you're really dealing with the wider world, even if you're just dealing, we don't even have to get into other dimensional stuff, even just dealing with unpredictability. It's like, you know, the fact that I can sit here and do a reading and get something that resonates with everybody. I mean, there's connections here. It's not because there's some woo super thing coming in. It's because there's a consciousness connection. You can connect to people's consciousnesses. That's what parapsychology research is about. A lot of it, although a lot of it now they're trying to discredit, but. I mean, I've read a lot of studies. There's something they're trying to understand how it does relate to the human body and how it does relate to that. And there's still organizations that do that, and they only take people who are like hardcore academics. I belonged to one for a while, and because it got too expensive, I had to drop it. But the American Parapsychology Association, they don't, you know, they don't want psychics and mediums. They want hardcore scientists. Because, back to what I was saying, 85% of psych studies were considered to be tainted in some way. Like there was something not reliable about the results based on that. But the only category where there was almost no bias and no clinical bias, where the results where you could read them as they were, was actually in parapsychology. Somebody actually covered that. Because in parapsychology studies, because it's one of those fields that people kind of, look down their nose at and, consider it to be kind of a woo-woo thing or whatever, and not a serious, like a pseudoscience, whenever they do scientific studies, they will usually design experiments. They will get somebody who is a hardcore skeptic to review the experiment and tell them where they think the loopholes are. And then they redesign the experiment to cut those loopholes out. So it is like a double review, double bind, all of it to make sure that the studies that they're doing are clean from that hard science perspective. So those are the ones, and they pay more attention because they know they're under more scrutiny for, whether or not they're quote unquote real. So anyway, I have this thing. I find that a lot of the methods that can be used can be actually, to me, almost inhumane. They're not helpful to people, and it's almost very behavioristic. Like you're a rat in the maze, and we just need to train you to go in the right direction. And that's been kind of the view of people. You know, the whole "you're meat with eyes," and it just isn't true. It's just patently not true, and it's. You know, I can't. So anyway, I tend to prefer other aspects of psychology that are that recognize the fact that there's a bigger picture, and it's a bigger picture we don't always understand, and it's not going to fit nice and neatly into our little causal ordering system. Okay, so that's, you know, to me that's not being woo woo. That's the reality. To try to ignore everything else around there and saying, you know, oh no, none of that's real. You didn't see any of that. Well, you know, no, people have had these experiences, and it's not just because people like to tell stories. It's not just, you know, storytelling is a narrative is a way of human consciousness. It's the way our consciousness works. It's the way we guide ourselves. We all have stories that we use to guide ourselves through things. And to act like the stories are something that you can dismiss as not an important part of the picture. The fact that you can dismiss all of these aspects of consciousness as not an important part of the picture, to me, is just ridiculous. I think of, I'm going to be very quick because I don't want to do our reading. I know we're getting close to the end of this live stream, but when I always point my myth students to Heinrich Fiers's Jungian psychiatry, and there's aspects of his approach that are questionable, but he does have this thing about what he talks about, the Medusa effect. And he was talking about a woman who was in a schizoid state. I mean, she had no verbalization. She had pulled all of her hair out. All of her teeth had fallen out. She was smearing things on the walls. Like, that was the only thing that she would do. And nobody could get through to her. So they put her in the clinic of Fiers's clinic, and he was like, I don't know what I'm going to do for her. But the family thought that psychotherapy would be able to help. So, eventually what happened was one day she was brought something, and she was given, I don't know, pudding or something like that. And she started to it was jam, that's what it was. And she drew a face with it. And then the doctor said, you know what? She's trying to get a message through here. Don't, you know, give her proper like paper and paints or, you know, whatever that, and let her, and he said it in front of her. And then the first thing she drew was this thing that looked like a circle. And it looked like it had a little airplane in the middle of it. It was this little city. And then she had said, what was it? Plane ready for takeoff, frozen in Arctic waters a long time ago, is what she wrote. And he has the pictures all in the book. And he said, oh, this is the personality that's been frozen. It's trying to get back to this. And, but it's been frozen. Something has happened to make it can't take off. Remember we were talking about symbolism and dream symbol? It can't take off. So the next day, she wrote an entirely lucid letter to her family about clinic, the life in the clinic, about the people there. And they were astonished, and the family wasn't. They were like, yep, we knew this was going to work. He basically worked her through the schizoid state through having her draw pictures, because he was connecting with the fact that her mind, what she was trying to connect with, she could work in symbols. And it worked her back to a state of having actual language. Long story short, at the end, I think after about 6 months in the clinic, and she did have some medication, but it was just a very, very small dose of whatever they were giving at that time. And he did say what it was, and I can't remember. But she was completely normal. She, got like a wig because she pulled her hair out. She got her teeth fixed. She already had spoken like 2 languages. I think she spoke German and English. And she went out and traveled the world and lived a normal life after that. And her therapy entirely consisted, almost entirely, very little of it was medication. Most of it was just working through images and the doctor looking and saying, understanding what she was trying to say, which brought her farther and farther back to a state of ego consciousness. Okay? So I'm, like I said, that's just like one example, but that's not something that's done these days. People would say, oh no, that's just, that's not the way it's done. That's just silly. This is all entirely a medical thing, and you have to think. And yeah, I know there's a chemical component. No doubt, there's a chemical component. Okay, I'm not casting any doubts that there's people who need these medications to maybe stabilize certain things. People who suffer from severe depression, that this can help them. We're not discounting that those things can't help, but they are not the cure. They're an adjustment. They're a fix. They're not a cure. And you have to recognize that life is not something that you're trying to cure. It's a matter of, you don't want to be in crisis. You don't want to be stuck in psychosis. You don't want to be stuck in crisis. You want to be able to move through those phases. But you're not going to, but again, with trying to ignore you're trying to ignore that whole aspect of consciousness. This is a 12th house themed live stream today. Definitely resonates for me. 12th house stuff. Yeah, exactly. It is, and it is the element of the 12th house. And it's weird because I think I think there is a weird aspect with Neptune and Pisces today that's kind of makes things a little nebulous. Speaking of the 12th house. We are kind of in this it's the space where things are not necessarily solid and clear all of the time. But we have to recognize that that's part of the big picture. I feel like the person who's going to feel the happiest and the most well-adjusted is the person who acknowledges that there is unpredictability, who acknowledges that there are intuitive flashes, who is able to listen to all of their senses and not just what they see with their eyes and what their mind starts running like crazy with. There's more to the picture, and that's really what I'm trying to get to with people. And when people are going through transitions, I'm like, okay, my whole coaching method is about, let's open up, to what the big picture is for you, and allow you to see the landscape. And in fact, our first card today is possibilities. Flying above and being able to see what's over everything, right? Seeing the big picture, being able to get to the top of the mountain and look down and see what's going on. Okay, the inner feeling of which we're unaware. 4 of Pentacles. In this case, I think this is about the way in which we build those walls and say, no, things can only exist within this little construct, within this little fence, within this little confine. Anything else is suspect or should be dismissed or is stupid or is delusional or crazy. That's they're referring to it as the miser. But to me, the 4 of Pentacles is when you build a little wall around something and saying, this is the only parameter and you can't go beyond it. And the external feeling of which we are aware is the mind. Okay, the mind gets involved. This is literally what I'm talking about. Thinking, when you read about this card in the Osho Zen book for this deck, he basically talks about, he says someday, sit down, get a tape recorder, or whatever, turn on your whatever recording thing you have on your phone, and just record what comes in your stream of consciousness. And he says, you'll realize there's a lot of it that's just, your mind generates a lot of garbage. And that's what he's saying. The mind, we privilege mind, but he's like, and again, mind has a use. It's a very useful tool. But a lot of times when it tries to take over, it's just bumbling its way through territory within this little box. It doesn't know how to get outside of that, Speaking of boxes, so swimming with this box. This is clinging to the past. And I think in this case, clinging to the past has more to do with clinging to past patterns, clinging to the idea that the narrative that says we can only interpret the world in this particular way. Okay? And what we need to do, can't make this up, integration. Okay? That's exactly what I'm talking about, integration. It's more about finding a balance. It's not about just balancing elements. It's about integrating elements. It's about integrating things that are outside of your experience without simply turning them into another version of your old experience. That there's a broader picture outside of what you can see. So, and by the way, this was not my intended topic today at all, but we've kind of gone here. So that's fine. It works. But yeah, integration. And that is integrating, okay, yes, the intellect is an important part of who you are. Cognition and science and all that is an important part of things, but it's only a part. You want to integrate that with other things, with experience, with understanding that there is a world that is kind of beyond that. I saw something, there's a lot more talk about quantum consciousness now because there was that study that was done about, and I want to say the study had to do with something to do with, it might have been connected to death, like funeral type stuff, like some kind of a study connected to that. But in this study, they're now talking about, because I think it was Penrose who had talked about the idea of quantum consciousness, that consciousness can function, that the aspects of consciousness that are not that kind of cognitive function as a wave. And a lot of people told him, well, no, a lot of physicists said that's not possible, that's ridiculous. And again, I probably have one of the videos I could probably show on that, but he said that no, that he had thought that he had talked to another guy, and I forget what his name is now. I can see his face in the picture, but I can't remember his name. But anyway, he was talking about the idea that this wave consciousness, because in other words, okay, I know what it is. For any quantum effects to last, it has to happen in a very, very cold space, which is why quantum computers and stuff have to be kept at absolute zero, really, really cold temperatures. So the brain is hot. It's very active. So they're like, well, no, the brain is really, really hot. So there's no way that kind of quantum wave function can take place. But they were saying that through these things they call microtubules, which are basically like tubes within tubes within tubes. And again, the type of structure that it is, they're saying that could create an effect that would be long enough for a quantum effect to be felt in consciousness. And so of course people still kind of thought, well, that's kind of weird. But now this new experiment that was done, there's actually been a couple of different studies not related to quantum consciousness that have said, yeah, that they experimentally have proved that those microtubules exist, and that yes, this does in fact happen. Now of course the person was saying, well, we don't know how this relates to consciousness. Yeah, well, because nobody knows anything about consciousness. But the idea that a quantum wave function is possible in the brain, that's like an interesting starting point for a lot of people saying, okay, maybe Penrose was onto something here. And of course he was a Nobel Prize winning physicist, but yeah, again, it's very hard when your whole idea of consciousness is centered around the brain, and no, it must be something that happens in the brain. And I don't know, I feel like, I do not have the background to get into any of the physics, but there's definitely a lot more to the picture. They're just starting to scratch the surface. But if you continue just to look at it from that perspective, there's a bigger perspective that needs to be looked at here. But we may be, in the sciences, we may be a long way off from doing that. And I feel like psychology, part of the reason I stopped being the chair of religion and psych is because it became all about cognitive psychology of religion and the neuroscience of religion. I had to accept papers and stuff on that, and I'm like, okay, that's nice, but what does this have to do with anything? It's almost more like we're trying to explain away, going back to Freud, trying to explain religion away as a neurosis. I mean, or as some kind of it just has some kind of evolutionary function or this or that. It's not. It's trying to put it in a box. And it's like, no, you can't. I mean, to put it in that box is actually, just because that's the only objective evidence points to, or the only evidence that you can test points to, that's absurd. That's you can't define the whole system that way, and the whole system may never really be definable. But that may be part of what we need to accept and work within and allow to kind of work through us. So anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me today. This was a little bit more, a little bit deeper, I think, than well, I don't know. I always tend to get into deep subjects. I can't seem to help myself. But anyway, I will be back tomorrow. I hope you all have a great Wednesday. And and like I said, there'll be more on the Kickstarter, and there again, I have the intuitive development class. Oh, anybody in New Jersey, which in Milford, we're doing the sound crystal Reiki sound healing on Saturday. Resonates more than you may think. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that, and you're very much welcome. So Anyway, everybody have a good rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow.